Ahoy! There seem to be some misconceptions floating around regarding how progression in the expansion will work and how possible it will be for new or returning players to catch up. Some are even asking for fresh start servers, so let's talk about what we know. The first obvious, very big thing with the expansion will be a level and gear score increase. The level will be increased to a maximum of 70 and the new gear score maximum will be 800. With current gear score only going up to 725 gear score, we're having a 75 increase, which is a very significant bump compared to the previous 25 increase between the last major upgrade, so to speak. That in itself would imply that current gear will be outdated, but it's not quite that simple. Because simultaneously with this update, we will also be seeing the reintroduction of Umbral Shards, which will allow you to upgrade gear. And they have already said that Umbral Shards can be used to upgrade gear from 700 gear score or above to 800. So some of the current gear, or a lot of the current gear, could actually be upgraded with the expansion. There could even be a benefit in having gear that is already at 725 gear score, because obviously it will very likely use less Umbral Shards to upgrade from 725 to 800 than it would from 700 to 800. Also, if you are a new player and you only have gear that is not even 700 gear score yet, then obviously you wouldn't be able to upgrade that. And you can't immediately 100% offset that by just farming more, because there is a weekly cap for Umbral Shards, and there's a general cap, a maximum of I think 1000 Umbral Shards that you can have in the first place. So you would have to wait a little bit if you're upgrading the exact same gear from 700 as somebody else would be upgrading from 725. However, very big note on this very thing. It is very likely that you don't even end up wanting to do that. And that's because there is a change that affects all current existing items, with maybe the exception of artifacts. We don't have clarification about that yet, but we have been told that artifacts will keep their value somehow. What will happen with the expansion is the removal of attributes from gear. So any strength, intelligence, constitution, and so on, whatever you may have on your gear, will be removed from that gear. And this will be replaced with other perks of, quote, relatively low power. Now, attributes aren't going away. You can just freely assign them from your attribute screen once you've reached max level. But what this means is that all of the current items will have a low power perk on them that is taking up one of the perk slots, whereas any new item would probably just have a normal power perk, a standard perk, or a good perk. Beyond that, there will also be the new perk charms, which are some kind of gear sockets that will allow you to unlock additional, probably also more valuable perks that can be swapped out to some degree. We don't know exactly how it works. It will be similar to gems from what we know so far, but those will probably also only be in new gear and not in existing gear. And on top of that, there will also be set bonuses from specific gear that you can get from new high-level activities, which will probably be what most people are after. So there are a lot of different things that are adding up here that will probably result in pretty much all existing gear just not maintaining value for very long. So you could likely get a very temporary boost from the existing gear, but I would not imagine it to last into the expansion to a significant extent. But there are of course more potential advantages than just the gear difference. Before we get into that, if you're enjoying the video so far, consider subscribing and clicking the bell. There's also the market advantage that players will have simply by playing right now. Not a real shocker here. If you buy things while they're cheap and sell them while they're expensive, you're gonna make some coin. As such, that is an advantage that older players technically have, but newer players can have if they start now and if they buy a little bit on the market now rather than waiting until the expansion. So it depends on when exactly you're picking the game up and how much gold you farm, how quickly. But it can be a situation where older players can definitely have an advantage, because you can also just buy a larger market share, which has always been the case in New World. On the other hand, the economy in New World used to be massively more inflated than it is now. There used to be things that went for multiple times gold cap, whereas nowadays most expensive things are barely over 100k. And that also means that some returning players from the very early days in particular might actually have a bigger advantage because some of them probably still sitting at gold cap. So a bit of a depends here, but either way, you can make some smart investments right now that can hopefully give you an advantage in the expansion. If you're interested in some details on that, then consider supporting me on Patreon, where I posted some more thoughts on that. Another thing that is very easy to catch up on is weapon mastery farm. It is technically an advantage, but at the moment there is doubled weapon mastery, so you can easily level that in a very short time. I've got a guide on that along with some other things that you can do in terms of preparation. I'll link right here if you want to check it out. Now we're getting to some more long-term advantages of varying degrees. Existing players will obviously already have more artifacts, and we know that artifacts will keep value in the expansion. We don't know how exactly that will work, we don't know how the upgrading and everything will be involved in that process, but having the artifacts in the first place is an advantage, and some are very easy to get because they have this luck save mechanic now where you basically guarantee to get them by the 5th time you kill a mob. But some mobs don't spawn that often, some of them are only on the PvP track and so on, so some artifacts are a bit more difficult to get, also the raid ones. As such, having those already, definitely something that takes a while to catch up on. What I think is worth keeping in mind in that regard is that many artifacts will never get used by the majority of players. Most players get a handful of artifacts that give them exactly what they want, specific perks, and then they don't really chase beyond that. So unless you're like me and you just want to have all the different artifacts, this may never be a big deal for you because a couple of artifacts are usually fairly easy to farm, assuming they're not the ones that are behind the PvP track. The PvP track in itself is an advantage that existing players will absolutely have. If you're already on track to 100, for example, you get on average better rewards, and I'm going to assume that it'll probably stay that way into the expansion. Aside of the existing gold difference, there might also be a difference in materials, for example, that players may have if they've played longer. Some of the old stuff may actually be worth more in the expansion or less depending on if we get a new tier of materials. So the prismatics, for example, might keep a lot of value or lose a lot of value or be used to upgrade into the next tier. We don't know, no information on that yet, so just guessing here. But depending on that, you can get more or less out of them. The same applies for crafting and refining gear sets, for example. If there are new tiers of those, then the old ones wouldn't have much value in comparison. But if not, then those will be important. If crafting is relevant at all, we don't know exactly what path crafting will go in the expansion. Same thing also applies for gathering gear. If you have higher tier gathering gear, that will give you an advantage initially at least. Again, if there's a higher tier in the future with the expansion, then that will be very temporary as well. The one thing that I would see as a pretty significant advantage is if you have trophies already, combat trophies against the various mob types, because it is likely that even if there's a new tier, the current tiers will still keep some value unless they somehow hand them out like candy in the expansion. And if they keep that value, then they're going to be useful for any kind of PvE content. They don't make a difference for PvP, but for PvE, and that would matter, for example, for the new raid or for the Catacombs mode, unless they're not enabled in there. As such, I think that is the one major thing, and trophies aren't as expensive as they used to be, but they also aren't cheap, especially if they are in demand, so that takes a while to farm up. The trophy that will likely particularly be in demand is the Lost Combat Trophy. But what's interesting about that is some people have been telling me that because of that, more people have started to farm the materials required for that trophy again as well, and that has already tanked the price a fair bit again. So economy works itself out to some degree, I suppose. There are also two kinds of other progression that are clear advantages right now, but that are absolutely avoidable as a new player if you start playing right now rather than waiting for the expansion, being the main story progression, because you might need to progress the main story quest line until the final point in order to unlock the new zone. I'm not sure. You might not. I'm assuming you probably won't, but I think there might be some tie-in for this quest line. And as such, doing that before the expansion means you don't have to do that when the expansion comes out if you start playing then. And the same thing applies for mount progression as well. If you want to have the fastest mount speed, then you want to max out your mount, which can be done very easily by using Vittles. You can just buy those off the trading post for fairly cheap, and then you can skip a lot of steps if you do it properly. So between all these things, I do believe there is an advantage for existing players, and I think existing players would also be frustrated if everything they have farmed and gathered for years would be completely invalidated. But I do believe it is the best time for a new player to start right now, so you can kind of prepare for the expansion, get everything set up, and then once the expansion drops, you're ready to go and you can catch up very, very quickly in a lot of ways at once. So I think the gap is going to be smaller than at any other given point. If you want more tips on how to prepare for the expansion as a new player, then consider checking out the video that I'll link right here, which talks about exactly that. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing, clicking the bell, and if you want early trading tips and support me further, you can do so on Patreon. Thanks to all of my patrons who already do exactly that, and thank you for watching. Duke Sloth, out.